In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, a young woman named Kayla Carter sat behind the wheel of her father's sleek silver sports car. The sun was bright, casting warm rays across the tree-lined streets as she drove, her eyes glancing at the acceptance letter lying on the passenger seat. "I did it," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. She had just received the news. She was accepted into her dream college. Her heart brimmed with joy, and the thrill of success made her feel like she was on top of the world. Her father, Officer Marcus Carter, had always been her rock, supporting her every step of the way. When she showed him the letter, his eyes had lit up with pride, and he handed her the keys to his car. "Go out and celebrate, kiddo," he had said, his voice filled with warmth. It was his way of showing how proud he was, letting her drive his prized car for the day. As she cruised through the quiet streets, she felt like the world was at her feet. Nothing could bring her down. Her curly hair bounced to the rhythm of the music playing softly on the radio, and she imagined her future, a bright one filled with opportunities, success, and happiness. But as she turned onto a secluded street, lost in her thoughts, Kayla didn't notice the police cruiser pulling up behind her, its lights flashing. Officer Rick Thompson, a seasoned cop known for his tough demeanor, watched her through his rearview mirror. He narrowed his eyes, his suspicion growing. "No way a kid like that drives a car like this," he muttered, his voice dripping with doubt. Without a moment's hesitation, he flipped on his siren and pulled up behind her, the sound piercing through the air. Kayla's heart jumped as she noticed the lights in her rearview mirror. Confusion clouded her features as she pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking slightly as she turned off the engine. "What's going on?" she thought, her mind racing as she tried to recall if she had done anything wrong. Officer Thompson approached the driver's side, his expression stern and unwelcoming. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering with a greeting. Kayla took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Of course, officer," she replied, her voice calm. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" But Thompson's eyes were already filled with suspicion. "Just hand over the documents, miss," he snapped, making no effort to hide his distrust. With a small nod, Kayla reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the papers. She handed them to Thompson, who snatched them from her hand without a word. As Thompson examined the documents, his face hardened. "This car is registered to a Marcus Carter," he said, his tone accusatory. "Care to explain that?" Kayla kept her composure, knowing that losing her cool would only make things worse. "Yes, officer, Marcus Carter is my father," she said, her voice steady. "He lent me the car to celebrate my college acceptance." But Thompson scoffed, clearly not believing her. "Right, and I'm the tooth fairy. Step out of the vehicle, miss." Kayla's heart raced as she unbuckled her seatbelt. "Officer, I'm telling you the truth. You can call my father to verify," she began, but Thompson cut her off, his voice rising. "I said step out of the vehicle," he shouted, and Kayla felt her legs shake as she slowly opened the door. She stepped out, feeling the warmth of the car's hood against her skin. As she faced Thompson, she tried once more to plead her case. "Sir, please, there's been a misunderstanding. I haven't done anything wrong." But it was clear Thompson wasn't listening. His face was set, his prejudices blinding him to the truth of the situation. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," he ordered, his voice cold and unyielding. Tears welled up in Kayla's eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to stay strong. "Why is this happening?" she thought as she placed her hands on the car. Just moments ago, she had felt on top of the world, and now she was being treated like a criminal. As Officer Thompson stomped back to his patrol car, Kayla's documents still clutched tightly in his hand. He began typing furiously on his laptop, his expression one of anger and distrust. "No way she's telling the truth," he muttered. "Marcus Carter, huh? Let's see about that." He called for backup, his voice crackling over the radio. "Dispatch, I need assistance, possible stolen vehicle situation." Kayla's heart sank as she heard those words. She felt fear grip her, and she closed her eyes, silently praying for this nightmare to end. She thought of her father, wishing he was there to protect her. "Officer, please," she pleaded one last time, her voice trembling. "Just call my father, he can explain everything." But Thompson's face remained hard as stone. "I've had enough of your stories, young lady. You're in serious trouble now." Minutes felt like hours as they waited for backup to arrive. The tension in the air was so thick, it was almost suffocating. Kayla stood there, hands on the car, feeling helpless. She thought about the acceptance letter, about how excited she had been just minutes earlier, and now it felt like a distant memory. Her perfect day was unraveling before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Suddenly, Officer Thompson's grip tightened around her arm, and she stumbled as he roughly pushed her toward his patrol car. This can't be happening, she thought, her mind reeling. Please, officer, you're making a mistake, she begged, her voice cracking with emotion. But Thompson ignored her, handcuffing her hands behind her back. The cold metal bit into her wrists, and she winced as the cuffs locked into place. Tears filled her eyes, and she felt her throat tighten as she fought back a sob. She felt small, powerless, and utterly humiliated. Passers-by slowed their cars, some even stopping to stare at the scene unfolding before them. Kayla could feel their eyes on her, filled with curiosity and judgment. She wanted to scream, to tell them she was innocent, but the words caught in her throat. "Officer, please, listen to me," she tried once more, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father is Marcus Carter. If you just—" "I said enough," Thompson barked, cutting her off. "You're only making this worse for yourself." Kayla fell silent, realizing with a sinking heart that her words meant nothing to this man. She felt ashamed, and the perfect day she had imagined was now nothing but a distant memory. Just then, another police cruiser pulled up, and Officer Amanda Perez, Thompson's partner, stepped out. She looked at the scene with wide eyes, her expression one of shock. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Thompson barely glanced up from his paperwork. "Got a possible car thief here. The car is registered to a Marcus Carter, and she's claiming it's her father's." Perez's eyes widened. "Wait, did you say Marcus Carter?" she asked, her tone urgent. Thompson frowned, not understanding her reaction. "Yeah, why?" he replied, his tone still harsh. Perez hesitated for a moment before leaning in and whispering, "Rick, that's Commander Carter's daughter, our new boss. He just transferred here last month." The color drained from Thompson's face as the gravity of his mistake hit him like a ton of bricks. He turned to look at Kayla, who was standing there, her face wet with tears, and for the first time, he felt a pang of guilt. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered, his arrogance replaced by panic. Kayla's heart leapt when she saw Officer Perez. "Please, just call my father," she said, her voice desperate but hopeful. Perez nodded, quickly pulling out her phone to make the call. "We need to fix this," she muttered. Moments later, the familiar sound of squealing tires filled the air as a black SUV pulled up. Commander Marcus Carter emerged, his face a mask of controlled fury. His eyes locked onto Kayla, and his expression softened for a moment before hardening again as he turned to face Thompson. "Officer, why is my daughter in handcuffs?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Thompson's face paled even further. "Sir, I didn't know," he stammered, but Commander Carter cut him off. "Did you even bother to listen when she tried to explain, or were you too busy assuming the worst?" His words hit like a hammer, and Thompson struggled to find the right response. Kayla watched her father confront the officer, her heart filled with a mix of relief and fear. She knew her father would protect her, but the humiliation still clung to her, making her feel exposed. Commander Carter's voice rose as he continued to question Thompson. "Why is she still in handcuffs, officer? And why did you not verify her identity before making these baseless accusations?" Thompson's mouth opened and closed, his earlier arrogance replaced by a look of dawning horror. Perez moved quickly to remove the handcuffs from Kayla, her hands trembling as she did so. "I'm so sorry, Miss Carter. This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice filled with regret. As the cuffs fell away, Kayla rubbed her wrists, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. Commander Carter helped his daughter to her feet, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. "It's going to be okay, Kayla," he whispered, his voice gentle. "You're safe now." But even as she leaned into her father's embrace, she couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation that clung to her. The memory of being handcuffed and judged by onlookers made her cheeks burn with shame. Commander Carter turned back to Thompson, his eyes blazing. "There will be consequences for your actions today," he said, his voice firm. You cannot treat people this way and expect it to go unnoticed. Thompson flinched at the words, his face a mix of shame and fear. Sir, I was just following protocol, he tried to explain, but Carter shook his head. No, you weren't. You were following your own biases, and you let them cloud your judgment. That's not how we serve and protect. The scene was tense, and the other officers who had arrived stood silent, watching the confrontation unfold. It was clear that the events of the day would not be easily forgotten, and the department would have to face the fallout. As Commander Carter led Kayla away from the scene, she felt a sense of relief, but also a heavy weight. She knew her father would fight for her, but the damage was already done. The image of the officer's accusatory eyes and the cold metal of the handcuffs would stay with her for a long time. She hoped that one day, things would change and no one would have to go through what she did. As Kayla and her father drove away from the scene, she stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. The streets that had seemed so bright and full of promise now felt cold and hostile. The memory of the handcuffs, the officer's cold eyes, and the way people stared at her like she was a criminal wouldn't leave her mind. She knew it wasn't right, and she wanted to believe that things could change. But after what happened, doubt started to creep in. Back at the police station, Commander Carter sat in his office, staring at his phone. His hands gripped the edges of his desk as he tried to calm the anger boiling inside him. He knew that what his daughter had gone through was more than just a mistake. It was a reflection of deeper issues within the department. The thought of Kayla's face, scared and confused, as she was treated like a criminal by one of his own officers, was almost too much for him to bear. He took a deep breath and dialed his superior's number. "Chief Reynolds, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but firm. "There's been an incident involving my daughter and one of our officers. It's not something I can ignore." Meanwhile, Officer Thompson stood in the station's locker room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He could barely recognize the man staring back at him. For years he had prided himself on being tough, on being the cop who didn't back down. But today, everything felt different. The look in Commander Carter's eyes, the realization of who Kayla was, and the truth about his own actions hit him hard. He wasn't the hero he thought he was. He was the villain. Perez found him there, leaning against the sink, his head down. "Rick, you really messed up today," she said softly. "Do you understand the gravity of what happened?" Thompson's hands trembled as he spoke. "I thought I was doing my job, Amanda. But now, I don't know." He looked up, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "How do you come back from something like this?" "You need to face it," she replied. "Commander Carter isn't going to let this slide, and you have to own up to what you did. It's not just about your career, Rick. It's about doing the right thing." Thompson nodded, but the fear in his chest didn't go away. He knew the consequences were coming, and he wasn't sure he could handle them. He could only imagine the impact it would have, not just on his job, but on his reputation, his family, and everything he'd worked for. As the sun set over the city, Commander Carter gathered his thoughts and prepared for the meeting with Chief Reynolds. The station was quiet, the weight of the day hanging in the air like a heavy fog. When he entered the chief's office, Reynolds looked up, his expression serious. "Marcus, I heard about what happened with your daughter. I'm sorry." "It's more than that, Chief," Carter replied, his tone sharp. "This isn't just about Kayla. This is about how our officers handle situations, how they treat people based on assumptions and bias. We need to take action." Reynolds sighed, rubbing his temple. "You know it's not that simple, Marcus. The department needs to change," Carter interrupted, his voice rising. "If we don't address this now, we're setting ourselves up for more incidents like this, and it won't just be my daughter next time." The chief nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. "What do you propose?" "I want a full review of Officer Thompson's conduct, and I want new training implemented for the entire force," Carter said. "We need to bring in experts on racial sensitivity, bias training, and community engagement. We can't pretend this is an isolated incident." Reynolds hesitated but eventually nodded. "All right, Marcus. We'll start with Thompson's review, and I'll make the calls about the training, but you know this is going to be a long road." "I'm prepared for that," Carter replied. I owe it to Kayla, and we owe it to the community." In the following days, the news of the incident spread through the station like wildfire. Some officers sympathized with Carter, understanding his frustration and agreeing that change was needed. Others, however, felt uneasy about the scrutiny. They had worked alongside Thompson for years, and some felt he was just being made an example of because the victim happened to be Carter's daughter. Thompson himself felt the pressure mounting. Every day, he walked through the station, feeling the stares of his colleagues. Some were sympathetic, while others judged him harshly. The whispers followed him wherever he went, and the weight of his mistake felt heavier with each step. He tried to go about his duties, but his mind was never far from that moment when he had handcuffed Kayla. It all came to a head one afternoon when Commander Carter called Thompson into his office. Thompson entered, his hands clasped nervously in front of him. "Sir, I know what I did was wrong," he began, but Carter held up a hand to silence him. "Officer Thompson, do you understand the depth of your mistake?" Carter asked, his tone cold and measured. "This isn't about an apology. This is about recognizing the damage you've caused, not just to my daughter, but to the integrity of this department." Thompson swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand, sir. I let my own prejudices get in the way. I should have listened to her. I should have verified her story before making assumptions." Carter's eyes burned with intensity. "It's one thing to say that now, but do you understand how this has affected Kayla? How this reflects on our entire department? The community we serve?" Thompson felt his chest tighten. "I do, Commander. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I know I can't take back what I did, but I want to learn. I want to change." Carter studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity. "I'm putting you on probation, and you will undergo bias and sensitivity training with the rest of the department. We're bringing in specialists, and you will be a part of that program. You'll also be required to engage in community outreach programs to rebuild the trust you've broken." Thompson nodded, the relief and shame warring within him. "Thank you for giving me a chance, sir. I won't waste it." Carter's expression remained hard. "This isn't about chances, Thompson. This is about you proving that you can change. Actions speak louder than words, and right now, your actions have said everything." As the days passed, the training program began, led by specialists brought in from outside the department. The sessions were intense, forcing officers like Thompson to confront their biases head-on. They engaged in role-play exercises, lectures, and open discussions about their experiences. It wasn't easy. Many officers found themselves defensive, resistant to the idea that they might have internal prejudices. Thompson struggled at first, feeling defensive as the instructors challenged his assumptions. But as he listened to stories from community members and saw the impact of his actions from another perspective, something started to shift. He realized that his pride had blinded him, that he had judged people without truly understanding their stories. It was painful, but it was necessary. One afternoon, during a role-play exercise, Thompson was paired with a community leader who portrayed a similar situation to what had happened with Kayla. This time, instead of jumping to conclusions, Thompson paused, listening carefully to the person's story. He found himself empathizing, understanding how his past actions had caused harm. As the exercise ended, he felt a sense of clarity, a determination to change not just his actions but his mindset. Meanwhile, Kayla was finding her own way to cope with the incident. With the support of her father and friends, she decided to speak out, using her voice to advocate for change. She joined community forums and spoke at local events, sharing her experience and encouraging others to come forward if they had faced similar situations. Her strength and courage became a beacon of hope for many, showing that even in the face of injustice, it was possible to stand up and fight for what was right. Commander Carter watched his daughter with pride, but he also felt a deep sense of responsibility. He knew that the department needed to do more than just train its officers. They needed to build real connections with the community. He implemented programs that encouraged officers to engage directly with residents, building trust through collaboration rather than intimidation. The changes didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, resistance, and difficult conversations. But slowly, progress was being made. Thompson became a regular presence at community events, listening to residents' concerns and sharing his own journey of growth. He wasn't perfect, and he knew he had a long way to go, but each day was a step toward becoming the officer he had once believed himself to be. Months later, during a community appreciation event, Kayla was invited to speak. As she stood at the podium, she looked out at the crowd, spotting her father and even Officer Thompson among the faces. "A year ago, I went through something that changed my life," she began, her voice steady. "I was judged based on my appearance, not my character. But instead of letting it break me, I chose to use it as a lesson for myself and for others." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Today, I see a community that is working together, striving to understand and support one another. It's not perfect, and there's still a lot of work to do, but I believe we're on the right path. We have to keep pushing for change, for fairness, and for a world where no one is judged by the color of their skin." As she finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Commander Carter's eyes shone with pride as he watched his daughter step off the stage, a symbol of resilience and hope. Officer Thompson, standing at the back, felt a sense of gratitude. He knew he had been given a chance to become the kind of officer who didn't just follow protocol, but one who served with understanding and compassion. Kayla approached her father and they embraced, knowing that while the journey had been difficult, it had also been worth it. Together, they were building a future where justice, empathy, and understanding stood at the forefront. And they would continue to fight for that future, one step at a time. Months passed, and the changes within the Willow Creek Police Department were starting to show. Kayla's story had become a rallying point, not just for the community, but for the department itself. Officers were beginning to understand that the training wasn't just about checking a box. It was about transforming their approach and recognizing the importance of building trust. One evening, as Officer Thompson patrolled the neighborhood, he noticed a group of kids playing basketball in the park. It was a scene he had passed by 1,000 times before. But today, something felt different. He pulled over and stepped out of his cruiser. The kids, seeing an officer approach, tensed up, their eyes wary. Thompson felt the tension, but decided to change the script. He smiled and called out, "Hey, mind if I show you how to shoot a proper three-pointer?" The kids exchanged skeptical glances, but one of them, a lanky boy with a determined expression, tossed him the ball. "All right, officer, show us what you got." Thompson took a deep breath, lining up his shot. He aimed and missed completely, the ball bouncing off the rim. The kids burst into laughter, and Thompson joined in, his shoulders shaking as he laughed at himself. "Guess I'm a little rusty," he admitted, shaking his head. But that moment of humor broke the ice. The kids relaxed, and soon Thompson found himself in the middle of their game, laughing, running, and even scoring a few points. When the game wrapped up, one of the boys, the same one who had first thrown him the ball, approached him. "You know, you're all right for a cop." Thompson felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Thanks, kid, and hey, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." He handed the boy a small card with his contact information. "We're here to help, and that's a promise." Back at the police station, Commander Carter was reviewing reports from the new community programs. He saw the changes, officers volunteering at local schools, attending neighborhood watch meetings, and even participating in community events. It was a small step, but each interaction helped build a bridge. One night, as Kayla prepared for her college move, she and her father shared a quiet dinner at home. "It's crazy how everything's changed since that day," she said, her voice thoughtful as she twirled her fork in her pasta. "I mean, I never thought I'd be speaking at events or working with community leaders." Carter looked at her, pride filling his eyes. "You turned something painful into something powerful, Kayla. You inspired change, not just for yourself but for so many others, and you've even helped officers like Thompson see things differently." Kayla smiled, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if it's really making a difference, or if people just go back to their old ways when no one's watching." Her father reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Real change takes time, and it's not always visible at first. But every action, every small step forward matters. You've already done so much. Kayla nodded, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence. But deep down, she knew the journey wasn't over. She still had doubts, and she knew that while some people in the department had embraced change, others remained resistant. She wondered if they could truly transform an entire system that had been in place for decades. The next morning, Thompson was assigned to a routine patrol near a busy shopping district. As he drove through the streets, he noticed a man sitting alone on a bench, his head bowed and his shoulders slumped. Something about the man's posture felt off, so Thompson parked his car and approached. "Hey there, everything all right?" Thompson asked, keeping his tone friendly. The man looked up, and Thompson noticed the sadness in his eyes. "Just rough day," the man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lost my job, my car broke down, and, well, it just feels like everything's falling apart." Thompson felt a pang of sympathy. "I hear you, man. Sometimes it feels like everything's hitting at once." He paused, then added, "But hey, there are people who care. Let me see if there's anything I can do." He offered the man a ride to a nearby job assistance center and even called in a tow truck for his car. As they drove, they talked about life, struggles, and how tough it could be to ask for help. For the first time in a while, Thompson felt like he was making a real connection, one that had nothing to do with his badge or uniform, but everything to do with being human. After dropping the man off, Thompson sat in his car for a moment, reflecting. A year ago, he might have dismissed the situation as just another call, another routine task. But now he realized that every interaction was an opportunity to show care and make a difference. But the story took an unexpected turn a few days later when a viral video began circulating on social media. It showed a different officer from the department, Officer Riley, aggressively arresting a young woman who had been selling homemade jewelry on the sidewalk without a permit. The video captured every moment, the officer's harsh tone, the way he shoved her, and the fear in the woman's eyes. The community was outraged, and protests began to form outside the police station. Commander Carter watched the video, his face grim. He knew that this incident would undo much of the progress they had made. He called an emergency meeting with the department, his voice firm as he addressed the officers. "This is exactly what we've been trying to prevent. Incidents like this destroy trust and set us back." Thompson felt the tension in the room. He knew Officer Riley well, they had trained together. But today, he felt a mix of anger and disappointment. Riley had refused to attend most of the community engagement events, claiming they were a waste of time. And now, his actions had created a firestorm. Kayla watched the protests unfold on the news, her heart heavy. She knew this was bigger than her story. This was about the community's deep-rooted frustration with a system that felt unchangeable. She decided to attend one of the protests, hoping to show some support and listen to what people were saying. As she stood among the crowd, she heard voices echoing her own feelings of anger and fear. "We're tired of this," someone shouted. "When will they start seeing us as people?" Another voice added. The energy was intense, and Kayla felt both anger and hope. People were speaking out, demanding justice, and she felt a deep connection with them. But as the protest continued, tensions rose. A few individuals in the crowd began pushing against the police barriers, and a scuffle broke out. Officers tried to maintain order, but the atmosphere was charged, and it was clear things could get out of hand. Suddenly, Thompson appeared in the crowd. He spotted Kayla, and recognizing the volatile situation, made his way toward her. "Kayla, you shouldn't be here. It's getting dangerous." Kayla looked at him, her eyes blazing. "I have every right to be here, just like everyone else. We deserve to be heard." Thompson's face softened. "I know, and I'm not here to stop you. I just want to make sure no one gets hurt." He paused, his voice dropping. "I'm trying to be different, to be better, and I want to help." Just as he spoke, a bottle flew through the air, shattering against the ground near them. The crowd surged, and Thompson instinctively shielded Kayla, pulling her out of harm's way. "We need to get to a safe spot," he urged, guiding her away from the chaos. As they reached a quieter corner, Kayla looked at him, her expression conflicted. "Why are you helping me?" Thompson's eyes met hers. "Because I know what it's like to be on the wrong side of things, and I want to make it right." Kayla stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. She nodded slowly. All right, but if you really want to make a difference, then listen to these people. Don't just protect me, protect them too. Moved by her words, Thompson joined the other officers, working to calm the crowd, not with force but with empathy. He spoke to the protesters, promising to take their concerns to Commander Carter and push for accountability. It was a tense, delicate process, but slowly the crowd began to calm. Thompson realized that building trust wasn't about being right. It was about showing that he was willing to learn and listen. Later that night, as the protest dispersed, Kayla watched from a distance. For the first time, she felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe there were more officers like Thompson, ones who could change, who could understand that justice wasn't just about following rules, but about understanding people's stories and struggles. Back at the station, Commander Carter gathered his team. We need to do more than just put out fires, he said, his voice resolute. We need to rebuild this community's trust from the ground up, and that means showing them we care, not just saying it. The officers nodded, and even Officer Riley, who had been the focus of the controversy, looked remorseful. The following week, the department launched a series of listening sessions with the community, allowing residents to voice their frustrations and propose solutions. Kayla attended, sharing her own story once again, this time alongside officers like Thompson, who spoke about their journey toward change. Sessions brought out stories from both sides, residents who had faced discrimination, and officers who had fell. Unexpectedly, the sessions brought out stories from both sides, residents who had faced discrimination, and officers who had felt misunderstood or trapped in a system they didn't know how to fix. There were tears, heated debates, and moments of silence, but gradually they found common ground. In one of the sessions, an elderly woman stood up, her hands shaking as she held onto a cane. I've lived in this neighborhood for 50 years, she said, her voice quivering. And I've seen good officers and bad ones, but I've never seen officers stand here and listen to us like this. Thompson felt a lump in his throat as the woman continued. I want to believe things can change, but you need to show us. You need to walk alongside us, not just stand in front of us. The room fell silent, and Thompson knew it was his turn to speak. I know I've made mistakes, he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. I used to think I was doing my job right, but I've realized that if we don't listen, if we don't work with you, we're not doing our job at all. He paused, scanning the faces in the room. I can't change what I've done in the past, but I can promise that I'll be here, day after day, working to earn back the trust that was lost. Kayla watched as the room erupted in applause, and for the first time she felt a genuine sense of unity. It wasn't just about the department or the community. It was about both sides coming together to create a future where people like her wouldn't have to live in fear of being misunderstood or judged unfairly. As she walked up to Thompson after the session, she extended her hand. Thank you for standing with us today. Thompson shook her hand, a look of determination in his eyes. It's just the beginning, Kayla. We still have a lot of work to do, but I'm in this for the long haul. Kayla smiled, feeling a sense of hope that had been missing for so long. So am I. Together, we can make sure that what happened to me won't happen to anyone else. The story wasn't over yet. The work had only just begun, but for the first time it felt like they were all moving in the right direction. As the weeks passed, the community sessions continued, becoming a regular event where people could speak openly about their experiences. It wasn't easy. Some meetings were heated, with emotions running high and tempers flaring. But the sessions also became a place where stories of hope, pain, and reconciliation were shared. Slowly but surely, a bridge was being built. One evening, as Kayla prepared to speak again, she noticed Officer Thompson sitting in the audience. He had been attending every session, listening and taking notes, trying to absorb every word. She appreciated his presence but remained cautious. She knew trust took time, and while she saw the effort, she also understood that true change would require more than just words. She stepped up to the microphone and took a deep breath. A few months ago, I never thought I'd find myself here, speaking in front of a room full of people, sharing my story. I felt powerless and ashamed when I was treated like a criminal for simply being in my father's car. Her voice wavered, but she pushed forward. But today, I'm standing here because I believe we can change things. I believe that what happened to me doesn't have to happen to anyone else. The audience was silent, every eye fixed on her. She continued, but change isn't just about one side. It's about both the community and the police working together. We have to listen, we have to understand, and we have to be willing to change. She glanced at Thompson, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes, a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. After the session, as people gathered to talk, Thompson approached her, a hesitant smile on his face. You're really making a difference, Kayla. I know it hasn't been easy, but I wanted to say thank you for giving me, a chance. Kayla's expression softened. I appreciate the effort, Officer Thompson. But you know as well as I do that it's a long road ahead. He nodded, a serious look crossing his face. I know, and I'm committed to it, for real. Just then a voice called out from behind them. It was an elderly man with a worn baseball cap and a cane, his face creased with age. Officer, young lady, he shouted, waving them over. The man was a familiar face in the neighborhood, known as Mr. Benson, a retired teacher who had lived in Willow Creek for decades. As they approached, Mr. Benson chuckled, his eyes twinkling. I've been watching you two. It's nice to see some young folks trying to make things right. But you know, he said, leaning in conspiratorially, the real test is whether you can handle my famous quiz questions. Kayla and Thompson exchanged puzzled looks. Quiz questions? Thompson asked, raising an eyebrow. Mr. Benson grinned. Oh yes, I used to run trivia nights at the community center, and I've got a mind like a steel trap, he winked. How about it? If you can answer 3 questions right, I'll believe you two really want to make a difference. Kayla laughed, the tension easing a bit. All right, Mr. Benson, hit us with your best shot. Mr. Benson rubbed his hands together, clearly delighted. First question, what is the longest river in the world? Thompson's face lit up. The Nile, he exclaimed confidently. Mr. Benson wagged a finger. Ah, not quite, young man. The Amazon recently took the title. You've got to keep up with the times. Kayla giggled, and even Thompson couldn't help but chuckle at his mistake. All right, you got me. What's next? Mr. Benson squinted, thinking hard. Okay, second question. What year did Willow Creek become an official city? Kayla bit her lip, trying to recall what she had learned in school. Is it 1957? Mr. Benson's eyes lit up. Bingo. That's 1 point for you, young lady. The small group around them laughed, the atmosphere becoming lighter. Thompson grinned. All right, what's the final question, Mr. Benson? The old man leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. What's the secret ingredient in my world-famous chili? Kayla and Thompson looked at each other, stumped. They both knew that Mr. Benson's chili was legendary in the neighborhood, but no one had ever figured out the secret. They exchanged a playful shrug. Come on, you've got to give us a hint, Kayla pleaded. Mr. Benson shook his head, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Nope, that's classified information. But here's the thing. When you're ready to earn the trust of this community, you'll get it. He winked again before hobbling away, leaving them laughing. The interaction, light and unexpected, made Kayla realize how important it was to build small connections with people. Change wasn't just about grand speeches and meetings. It was about moments like this. Sharing a laugh, showing up, and earning trust bit by bit. But just as things seemed to be looking up, a surprising development hit the department. A journalist from a local news station had obtained body cam footage from Officer Riley's incident and leaked it to the public. The footage was damning. It showed Riley escalating the situation unnecessarily, using force when it wasn't needed, and dismissing the young woman's attempts to comply. The video quickly went viral, drawing national attention and sparking outrage. Protests grew larger, and the media descended upon the small suburb, eager to report on the unfolding scandal. Commander Carter found himself in a storm of controversy. He called an emergency press conference, his voice firm but calm as he addressed the cameras. We understand the community's outrage, and we share it. The behavior displayed in the video is unacceptable, and we are taking immediate action to address it. Reporters fired questions at him, their voices overlapping. What consequences will Officer Riley face? One shouted. How do you plan to rebuild trust? Another demanded. Carter kept his composure. Officer Riley has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We are also fast-tracking additional training and accountability measures. We owe it to this community to get this right, and we will. But even as he spoke, Carter knew that words wouldn't be enough. That evening, as he sat in his office, reviewing plans for additional reforms, Kayla knocked on his door. "Dad? Can we talk?" He gestured for her to sit, a tired smile on his face. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Kayla hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I know you're doing everything you can, but people are scared and angry. They don't just want promises. They want to see real change." Carter nodded. "I know, and it's going to take time, but I believe we're on the right track." Kayla looked down at her hands, thinking, what if we took it a step further? What if we invited the community to work directly with the police, not just through meetings, but by forming a council, a group that helps make decisions about policy, training, and community events? Carter's eyes widened slightly, impressed by her idea. That could work. It would give people a voice in the department, a way to feel truly involved in the change. Kayla smiled, feeling a spark of hope. Exactly. And it could show that we're serious about this. That we're not just talking about change, we're letting them be part of it. The next week, the department announced the formation of the Community Advisory Council, a group composed of residents, activists, and police officers working together to guide future policies and actions. The council's first meeting was filled with tension, but also with optimism. Residents voiced their concerns directly to officers, and for the first time, it felt like the two sides were not just facing each other, but facing their problems together. At the council meeting, Thompson found himself paired with a young woman named Jasmine, who had been active in organizing protests. She was skeptical, her arms crossed as she listened to his introductions. "So, you're the officer who's supposed to listen now, huh?" she said, her tone sharp. Thompson smiled, his expression earnest. "Yeah, and trust me, I'm doing my best. It's been a learning process, and I know I've got a lot more to understand." Jasmine's eyes softened, but she remained guarded. "We'll see. Actions speak louder than words." As the meeting progressed, Kayla watched from across the room, feeling a surge of pride. She had never imagined that her painful experience would lead to something like this. A room full of people, all trying to build a better future together. She knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt like they were truly on the right path. After the meeting, as the attendees filed out, Jasmine and Thompson continued talking. "You know, if you really want to make things right, you should join us at our next community event," she challenged. "It's a barbecue fundraiser. Think you can handle flipping burgers and talking to people?" Thompson grinned. "I'm in. But just so you know, I make a mean burger. You've been warned." Jasmine laughed, and for a moment, the tension between them lifted. "All right, officer, let's see what you've got." A few days later, the community barbecue was in full swing. The smell of grilled meat filled the air, and laughter echoed through the park. Thompson worked the grill alongside Jasmine, flipping burgers and joking with residents. At one point, Mr. Benson approached, holding out a spoonful of chili. "I'm still waiting for you two to guess my secret ingredient." Kayla, who had been helping serve food, leaned over with a grin. "Is it cinnamon?" Mr. Benson's eyes widened in surprise. "Well, I'll be. Looks like you've earned it." He laughed, and the whole group joined in, the atmosphere warm and light. For the first time in a long while, the community felt united, not divided by uniforms or misunderstandings, but brought together by shared food, laughter, and a genuine effort to understand one another. As the barbecue fundraiser continued, the atmosphere remained light and festive. People from all walks of life were gathered, sharing food, telling stories, and laughing together. Kayla felt a sense of warmth and belonging she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if, for a moment, all the pain and division that had marked the past few months had melted away, replaced by a hopeful sense of unity. But as the sun began to set and the lights strung up around the park twinkled on, a new, unexpected event stirred the crowd. A young boy, no older than 10, ran up to the microphone that had been set up for announcements. His face was bright, but there was an urgency in his eyes. "Excuse me, everyone," he shouted, his voice echoing through the park. The crowd hushed, all eyes turning to the boy. My name is Danny, and I want to say something. He paused, taking a deep breath. My mom was hurt by the police a long time ago. She was selling food to pay our rent, and they took everything. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kayla's heart sank, and she saw Thompson's face tighten as he listened. Danny continued, his voice shaking but determined. I've always been scared of cops because of that. But today, he hesitated, looking down for a moment before lifting his eyes to the crowd again. Today, I see officers like Thompson here, and he's been nice to me. He even helped me with my bike last week when I fell. Danny's voice quivered, and he sniffled, trying to hold back tears. I guess not all cops are bad. The crowd was silent, and the emotional weight of the boy's words hung in the air. Thompson, who had been standing near the grill, wiped his hands on his apron and slowly made his way to Danny. He knelt down to the boy's level, his face filled with sincerity. Thank you, Danny. That means a lot. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I know some of us have made mistakes, and it's going to take time to make things right. Danny's eyes softened, and he nodded, but his expression was still serious. Promise you'll keep trying? Thompson put a hand on his heart. I promise. The crowd erupted into applause, and Kayla felt tears welling up in her eyes. She glanced around, seeing the mix of emotions on people's faces, hope, relief, and perhaps a little cautious optimism. It was one small moment, but it felt like a giant step forward. Later that night, as the event wound down, Kayla found herself standing alone near the edge of the park, watching the lights dance in the trees. Thompson approached, carrying 2 plates of leftover food. Mind if I join you? He asked, offering her a plate. She smiled, taking the plate gratefully. Thanks. And by the way, that was really brave what you said to Danny. Thompson shrugged, but there was a softness in his eyes. It was the least I could do. It's kids like him that remind me why we do this. Why we have to do better. They ate in silence for a few moments, the comfortable quiet between them a testament to how far they had come. Then Kayla spoke, her voice thoughtful. You know, when all this started, I didn't think I'd ever trust a police officer again. But you, she paused as if considering her words carefully, you've shown me that people can change. Thompson's eyes met hers, and he smiled. And you've shown me that people like me need to change. It's a two-way street, and I'm grateful for the chance. Before she could respond, there was a sudden commotion near the entrance of the park. People were shouting, and the mood shifted from calm to tense in a matter of seconds. Thompson's eyes snapped to the crowd, and he instinctively moved toward the noise, with Kayla close behind. As they got closer, they saw a group of teens arguing with an older man. The man was waving his arms, clearly agitated, while the teens looked defensive. You kids can't just do whatever you want, the man shouted. This park isn't your playground. One of the teens, a tall boy with a determined look, crossed his arms. We're not causing any trouble, old man. We're just hanging out. Thompson stepped in, raising his hands in a calming gesture. Hey, let's all take a deep breath. What's going on here? The older man turned to Thompson, his face red. These kids are always hanging around, making noise and causing trouble. I've had enough. Thompson nodded, his voice calm. I understand your frustration, sir, but let's talk it out without raising our voices, okay? Kayla watched, impressed by how Thompson handled the situation. She saw the teens' shoulders relax slightly as they sensed Thompson wasn't there to escalate things. We're not trying to cause any problems, one of the teens said. We just don't have anywhere else to go. Thompson turned to the teens, understanding flashing in his eyes. I get that. How about this? Why don't we work together to set up some space where you guys can hang out without worrying about bothering anyone? The teens exchanged glances, surprised by the offer. You'd do that for us? The tall boy asked, suspicion mingling with hope. Absolutely, Thompson replied. But we'll need your help to make it happen. Deal? The teens nodded, and the tension eased as they all shook hands. The older man, though still grumbling, softened a little. Fine, as long as they keep it down. As the crowd dispersed, Kayla approached Thompson, shaking her head with a smile. You know, you're getting pretty good at this. Thompson laughed, relief in his eyes. Well, I've had some good teachers. He glanced at Kayla, his expression sincere. And honestly, it feels good to do things differently, to build trust instead of breaking it. Kayla's smile widened, and for a moment, She felt hopeful. More hopeful than she had in a long time. It's working, you know. People are starting to believe. As they walked back toward the park center, where the last of the barbecue cleanup was happening, a sudden loud pop echoed through the air. People froze, heads turning toward the sound. The silence was deafening. The moments stretched as everyone held their breath. Thompson immediately tensed, his eyes scanning the area. Kayla felt her heart race as she grabbed his arm. What was that? He didn't have time to answer before another pop rang out. This time, people started to panic, some running for cover, others shouting in confusion. Thompson grabbed Kayla's hand, pulling her behind a parked car. "Stay low and stay here," he instructed, his voice firm. Kayla's pulse quickened as she crouched behind the car, watching as Thompson moved cautiously toward the sound, his hand resting on his radio. She wanted to follow him, but fear kept her rooted in place. As Thompson approached the park's edge, he saw a small group of people gathered near a car. One of them was holding what looked like fireworks, and they were arguing heatedly. Thompson's shoulders relaxed slightly as he realized it wasn't gunfire, but his relief was short-lived when he noticed one of the young men in the group pulling something from his pocket. "Stop right there," Thompson shouted, his voice authoritative but calm. "Hands where I can see them." The young man hesitated, his eyes wide, caught between fear and defiance. The tension was thick, and for a moment it seemed like everything was hanging by a thread. Then, unexpectedly, Kayla appeared beside Thompson, despite his earlier warning. "Kayla, I told you to stay back," he hissed. But Kayla raised her hands, showing she meant no harm. "It's okay. Let me talk to them." The young man's eyes flickered with recognition as he saw her. "You're that girl from the meetings, right? The one who stood up against the cops?" Kayla nodded, her voice steady. "Yeah, that's me. And I'm here to say you don't have to do this. Whatever you're feeling right now, let's talk it out." The young man's hand trembled as he held the object, which turned out to be nothing more than a phone. I just don't trust cops, you know? They've never been there for us." Kayla stepped closer, her voice soft but firm. "I get it. I know how you feel. But things are changing, and it starts with us." She gestured toward Thompson. "This officer, he's not like the others. He's trying, and I'm trying. Can we at least talk?" The young man hesitated, his eyes scanning the faces around him. Finally, he lowered his hand, nodding slowly. "All right, we can talk." As the crowd around them breathed a collective sigh of relief, Thompson lowered his guard, feeling a mixture of pride and gratitude. Kayla had risked herself to de-escalate the situation, and her bravery had paid off. Later, as the park emptied and the night quieted, Thompson and Kayla stood side by side, watching the moonlight dance on the trees. "You were amazing back there," Thompson said. "You have a gift." Kayla laughed softly, the sound light and relieved. "I guess we make a pretty good team," Thompson grinned. "The best." The journey wasn't over, and there would be more challenges ahead, but in that moment, they felt the strength of their partnership, knowing that together, they could face whatever came next. The following days brought new developments that both strengthened and tested the fragile trust the community and the police were building. The park incident became a turning point, spreading quickly through word of mouth and social media. People talked about how Officer Thompson had kept his calm and how Kayla had bravely stepped in to de-escalate the situation. For many, it was a sign that things could change, that the department's efforts weren't just for show. But not everyone was convinced. A small but vocal group in the community remained skeptical, fearing that the reforms were only temporary and that things would eventually return to the status quo. Thompson, aware of these concerns, felt the pressure mounting. He knew that one misstep could unravel everything they had worked so hard to build. One afternoon, as Kayla prepared to leave for college, she and her father sat together in the living room, going through the last of her packing. "You know, it's crazy how much has changed since that day," she said, folding a shirt and placing it in her suitcase, "and I still can't believe I'm leaving when things are finally starting to get better." Commander Carter's eyes softened. "You've done so much already, Kayla. The fact that you're leaving doesn't mean you can't still be part of the change. You've inspired people, me included." He smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "It's just that, as your father, I'm going to miss having you around." Kayla laughed. a sound both light and heavy. "I'll miss you too, Dad, but I'll be back often, and hey, maybe I'll even get involved in activism on campus." As they continued packing, Carter's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening as he read the message. "I have to go to the station," he said, standing up. "There's been a situation downtown. Protests have broken out again." Kayla's face fell. "What happened?" Carter sighed. "The officer who was under investigation, Riley, has been reinstated temporarily. People are furious." Kayla's heart sank. She knew how much the community had demanded accountability for Riley's actions, and hearing that he was back on the force felt like a betrayal. Why would they bring him back? "There are protocols, procedures," Carter explained, his voice heavy with frustration. "His case is still under review, but legally, we had to put him back on until a decision is made." Kayla's eyes flashed with anger. "But what about the people he hurt? What about the message this sends?" Carter placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her. "I know it's not fair, but we're working on it. I promise." After he left, Kayla felt the familiar rush of anger mixed with helplessness. She couldn't just sit by while things unraveled. She grabbed her jacket and headed downtown, determined to see the protests for herself. When she arrived, she was met with a scene of chaos. Protesters held up signs, chanting demands for justice, while officers formed a line, trying to contain the crowd. Kayla's heart pounded as she spotted Thompson among the officers. She pushed her way through the crowd until she reached him. "Kayla, what are you doing here?" Thompson's voice was filled with concern. "I had to come," she said, her eyes scanning the tense standoff. "People are angry. They feel betrayed." Thompson nodded, his jaw tight. "I know, and honestly I get it, but we're here to make sure things stay peaceful." Just then, a protester threw a water bottle and it hit one of the officers in the shoulder. The officer flinched but held his ground. The atmosphere became electric, the air thick with anticipation as everyone braced for what would happen next. "Hey, hey," Thompson shouted, stepping forward. "Everyone, please, let's keep this peaceful. We're here to listen." But the crowd's anger wasn't easily quelled. A few more objects were thrown, and the police line tensed, preparing for the worst. Kayla felt her breath catch, fear creeping into her chest. She knew that one wrong move could turn the protest into a full-blown riot. Without thinking, she climbed onto a nearby bench and shouted, "Stop! Please, stop!" Her voice cut through the noise, and for a moment, people paused, turning to look at her. "I know you're angry. I am too," she continued, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "But if we fight like this, it won't solve anything. It'll only give them an excuse to say we're the problem." Some in the crowd murmured in agreement, but others looked skeptical. "What's the point of peaceful protests?" one voice shouted. "They don't listen to us anyway." Kayla's heart ached at the truth in the words. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the faces around her. "I know it feels hopeless, but we've already seen change. We've seen officers like Thompson stand with us, listen to us, and work to make things better. We have to keep pushing for that change the right way." Thompson watched from below, his heart swelling with admiration. The crowd's energy began to shift, the tension slowly dissipating as Kayla's words resonated with more people. A few began to lower their signs, and the throwing stopped. But just as it seemed like things were calming down, a loud crash echoed from the edge of the protest. A small group had tipped over a metal barricade, and the police line moved in response. Kayla's eyes widened as she saw the officers advancing, and her pulse quickened. This was the kind of moment that could make or break everything. Thompson turned to his fellow officers, his voice firm. "Hold the line, don't escalate, we've got this." He then ran to where the barricade had fallen, Kayla following close behind. As they reached the group, they saw a young man with a mask over his face, glaring defiantly at the officers. "They don't care about us," he shouted. "Why should we care about them?" Kayla recognized him. His name was Malik, a local high school student who had been vocal in community meetings. "Malik, wait," she called out, stepping between him and the officers. "This isn't the way." Malik's eyes were filled with anger. "Why not? They're not on our side." Kayla's voice softened, filled with empathy. "I know it feels that way, but look, Thompson is here. He's trying to help, and we can't ruin everything we've worked for because of one officer." Thompson stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Malik, I'm here to protect you, not hurt you. Let's talk. For a moment, it seemed like Malik would refuse, but then, with a frustrated sigh, he lowered his head. Fine, but I'm tired of waiting. Kayla reached out, putting a hand on his shoulder. I know, we all are, but if we stand together, we can make them listen. As Malik stepped back, the officers relaxed and the tension slowly lifted. The protest continued, but it remained peaceful. Kayla stayed, speaking to groups of protesters, reassuring them that their voices were being heard. Afterward, as the protest wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Thompson found Kayla, his expression a mix of relief and gratitude. You saved the day again. Kayla laughed softly. I think we both did. He shook his head, his eyes sincere. No, really. You're the reason people are starting to believe in us. Without you, I don't know where we'd be. Kayla felt a warmth spread through her chest. It's not just me, it's all of us, working together. As they walked back through the now quiet streets, Kayla realized that despite the setbacks, they were making progress. There were still challenges ahead, but moments like this reminded her that change was possible. That night, she and Thompson sat on the steps of the police station, watching the city lights twinkle. You know, she said thoughtfully, I used to think that if we didn't see immediate change, it meant we were failing. But maybe it's about the small wins. Thompson nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. The small wins add up, and who knows, one day they might just become something big. Kayla grinned. Well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm in this for the long haul. Thompson's eyes sparkled with determination. So am I. And together, they knew that while the road ahead would be long, they were walking it side by side, committed to building a better future for everyone. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning, and they were ready for whatever came next. As the days passed, the energy in the community grew both hopeful and tense. People were divided, some optimistic about the changes they saw, while others remained skeptical, fearing that the goodwill and promises would fade away when the attention died down. The community council meetings were gaining momentum, and more residents joined, bringing their concerns and hopes to the table. But each meeting also brought reminders of how deep the mistrust ran and how much work was still left to do. One evening, as Kayla was preparing for another meeting, she received a text from Malik. It was brief. We need to talk. Urgent. She felt a sense of unease as she read the message. Malik had become increasingly frustrated over the past few weeks, feeling that the progress was too slow and that the police weren't doing enough. Kayla texted back asking him to meet her at the local cafe where they often hung out. When she arrived, she saw him pacing outside, his face set in a deep frown. Hey, what's going on? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. Malik glanced around, making sure they were alone. Kayla, I don't think these meetings are enough. I've been talking to some people, and we're planning something bigger. Kayla's eyes narrowed. What do you mean by bigger? He lowered his voice, his tone urgent. We're planning a march, a huge one, but not just any march. We want to block off the main intersection downtown, make them listen. If we disrupt the traffic, they'll have no choice but to pay attention. Kayla's heart sank. She knew the intersection Malik was talking about. It was the busiest area in town, and blocking it would undoubtedly cause chaos. Malik, that's risky. If it gets out of hand, the police will have to respond. It could turn into a disaster. Malik's eyes flashed with determination. That's the point, Kayla. They need to see we're serious. Peaceful protests haven't been enough. Kayla paused, her mind racing. I get it, Malik. I really do. But if things escalate, we could lose everything we've worked for. We need to find a way to make them listen without violence. He shook his head, frustration evident in his eyes. Maybe you've forgotten, but they weren't listening when we tried that. I know you believe in them, but not all of us have that luxury. Kayla felt a pang of guilt. She had seen some positive changes, but she knew many others hadn't experienced the same. Malik, I haven't forgotten, but we have to think long term. If this goes wrong, it'll set us back. Malik sighed, looking torn. I don't know, Kayla. I just feel like we're running out of options. Kayla placed a hand on his arm, her voice soft but firm. Just promise me you'll be careful. We can still make a difference without burning everything down. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll think about it. But don't ask me to wait forever. The conversation left Kayla uneasy. She knew Malik's frustration was justified, but she feared that his approach could lead to something much worse than a blocked intersection. As she headed to the community council meeting, she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. At the meeting, tensions were higher than usual. The news of Officer Riley's reinstatement had spread, and people were angry. Voices rose, accusations flew, and even the police representatives struggled to maintain calm. Thompson, who had become a regular at these meetings, tried to diffuse the tension, but it was clear the trust they had worked so hard to build was on shaky ground. Kayla stood up, raising her hands to get everyone's attention. "I know things feel impossible right now," she began, her voice steady but impassioned. "And I know we're all tired of waiting for change, but I promise you, these meetings aren't just for show. We have a chance to make real decisions, policies that can affect all of us, but we have to stay united." A woman in the back, arms crossed tightly, shook her head. "Words are cheap. How do we know this isn't just a show to calm us down?" Kayla's eyes met the woman's, and she felt the weight of the room's doubt. "I understand your fear, and I know we've been let down before. But look around. There are officers like Thompson who are here, listening and willing to work with us." Thompson nodded, stepping forward. "I'm committed to this community, and I want to prove that with action. We're setting up a community safety program where residents will have direct input. We need your voices." Some people nodded, and the room's atmosphere seemed to shift slightly. But as the meeting ended, Kayla still felt a lingering sense of unease. She knew Malik and others like him were losing patience, and she feared what might happen if they decided to take matters into their own hands. The next day, Kayla was sitting at the park, thinking about the meeting and her conversation with Malik, when her phone buzzed. It was Thompson. "We need to talk. Something's come up." They met at a quiet corner of the park, and Thompson's face was lined with worry. "Kayla, we've been monitoring social media and some group chats. There's talk about a big demonstration downtown blocking the main intersection." Kayla's heart sank. "Malik told me about it. He thinks it's the only way to get their attention." Thompson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I get it, but the problem is, the department has to respond. If things escalate, it could get out of hand." She felt a knot form in her stomach. "Is there any way to stop it?" "We're trying to reach out to the organizers, but if they go through with it, we'll need to prepare for the worst. I don't want this to become another confrontation." Kayla nodded, her mind racing. "Maybe I can talk to Malik again. I'll try to convince him to at least keep it peaceful." Thompson's eyes softened with concern. "Just be careful. I don't want you caught in the middle if things go wrong." Kayla promised she'd be cautious, but as she walked away, she knew she was running out of time. Malik's group was determined, and unless she could find a way to reach them, the situation could spiral out of control. On the day of the protest, Kayla's nerves were on edge. She arrived early, watching as people gathered, holding signs and chanting. Malik was there, at the front, his face set in determination. Kayla made her way through the crowd until she reached him. "Malik, we need to talk," she said urgently. He looked at her, his eyes hardened. "There's nothing left to talk about, Kayla. This is happening." She grabbed his arm. "I know you want to make a statement, but we have to keep it peaceful. Promise me you'll try." He hesitated, his expression torn. "We'll try, but if the cops push, we push back." As the crowd swelled, Thompson and his team positioned themselves at the edge of the intersection. Kayla could see the tension in their faces, and she felt her heart race. She knew that if anything went wrong, it could shatter all the progress they had made. The protest began peacefully, with people chanting and holding signs. Kayla stayed close to Malik, trying to keep the atmosphere calm. But as the minutes passed, the crowd grew larger and more agitated. Some people, clearly not part of the original group, started shouting and pushing against the police line. "Stay back," Thompson called out, his voice steady but urgent. "We're not here to fight." But the shouts grew louder, and someone threw a rock. The police line tensed, and the air became charged with a sense of impending chaos. Kayla grabbed Malik's arm. "Malik, we have to control this." He looked conflicted, but before he could respond, a group of masked individuals rushed forward, shoving the barricades. The police responded, and in an instant, The peaceful protest turned chaotic. People screamed, and Kayla felt herself being pushed and pulled by the surging crowd. Thompson's voice boomed over the noise, trying to regain control. "Hold your ground. Do not engage." But it was too late. The scene had erupted into confusion, and officers were struggling to maintain order. Kayla found herself in the middle of the chaos, her heart pounding. She spotted Malik, who was trying to pull people back. "Kayla, get out of here," he shouted, but she refused to leave. "We need to stop this," she yelled back. But as she turned to help, she felt a sharp pain in her side as she was shoved to the ground. Thompson saw her fall, his eyes widening in alarm. "Kayla," he shouted, pushing through the crowd to reach her. As he helped her up, the noise and chaos continued to escalate around them. "We need to get you out of here," he said urgently. Kayla shook her head, wincing from the pain. "No, we need to stop this." Just then, a loud siren blared, and police reinforcements arrived. The situation was teetering on the edge of disaster, and Kayla knew they had to act fast. With Malik's help, she climbed onto a platform, grabbing a bullhorn. "Everyone, listen," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "This is not what we came here for." The crowd hesitated, and she continued. "We're here for justice, not violence. Don't give them a reason to tear us down." Her words began to sink in, and the protesters slowly pulled back, creating distance between themselves and the police. Malik raised his hands, signaling his group to stand down. Thompson, seeing the change, ordered his team to step back as well. The chaos slowly subsided, and Kayla felt a wave of relief. But as she looked out at the faces in the crowd, some still angry, some afraid, she knew the fight was far from over. The intersection was still filled with people, but the tension had eased, and for the first time that day, there was hope. After the protest, Kayla and Thompson stood together, watching the crowd disperse. "That was close," he said, his voice filled with relief. Kayla nodded, her heart still racing. "Too close." Thompson turned to her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved the day again, Kayla. I don't know how you do it." Kayla smiled, though her eyes were weary. "We're in this together, remember? It's the only way we'll make it through." As they stood there side by side, they knew that the road ahead would be filled with more challenges. But they also knew that, together, they could face anything. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning, and they were ready for whatever came next. As the weeks passed after the protest, the community and the police department continued their work to heal and rebuild trust. Kayla and Thompson became even more involved, spearheading initiatives that brought neighbors and officers together in ways that felt real and lasting. They organized workshops, youth programs, and open dialogues where people could voice their concerns and work on solutions together. Slowly but surely, the bridges they built held firm. But one day, as Kayla was getting ready to leave for college, Thompson surprised her by showing up at her door. "I know you've got a big day ahead of you," he said, holding a small gift-wrapped box, "but I couldn't let you go without thanking you." Kayla smiled, taking the gift. "You don't have to thank me. We've done this together." Thompson's eyes were warm but serious. "I do have to thank you, Kayla. You saved me from a path of complacency. You showed me how much more I could do, how much more we could do. You changed everything." Kayla felt her eyes sting with tears as she opened the gift. Inside was a small, handcrafted badge, engraved with the words, "Courage, Unity, Hope." She looked up at Thompson, her voice choked with emotion. "This is beautiful. Thank you." "It's a reminder," he said softly. "No matter where you go, you'll always be part of this community. You'll always be part of the change." Kayla pulled him into a hug, and for a moment they stood there, the weight of all they'd accomplished together hanging between them. "I'll be back," she promised. "This is my home, and I'm not done fighting for it." Later that day, as she and her father loaded up her car, she saw familiar faces gathering outside their house. It was the neighbors, the kids from the community programs, and even some of the officers she'd worked with, all there to see her off. Malik was among them, holding a sign that read, "See you soon, Kayla. Keep fighting." Her father smiled, wrapping an arm around her. "You've made a real difference here, Kayla. I couldn't be prouder." Kayla's heart swelled as she waved goodbye, surrounded by the people she had fought so hard for and with. The love, the unity, It was everything she had dreamed of when she first stood up against the injustice she faced. She realized that while she was leaving, she wasn't really saying goodbye. She was leaving a piece of herself behind, a legacy that would continue to grow and inspire others. As she drove away, the sun setting behind her, she felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was long, but she knew she'd never walk it alone. The friendships she had forged, the community she had helped build, and the hope she had sparked would remain. And in her heart, she knew she'd always be connected to the place where everything had begun. In the rearview mirror, she saw the community she had helped shape, waving and cheering her on. She whispered to herself, "This isn't the end, it's just the beginning."